the car that turned confidence into a liability. At first, it rewarded confidence with speed, control, and an intoxicating sense of mastery that made drivers feel untouchable. Then, without warning, that same confidence became the very thing that betrayed them. To understand why this car changed confidence from an advantage into a liability, we have to go back to a moment when self-belief was treated as a performance metric, when manufacturers assumed that drivers wanted to feel powerful more than they wanted to be careful, and when technology began amplifying ego faster than skill could keep up. This car arrived during an era obsessed with dominance. More power, sharper response, faster reactions. Every input was designed to feel immediate, decisive, and authoritative, as if the machine itself was validating the driver's belief that they were always in control. The steering responded instantly. The throttle delivered force without hesitation, and the chassis obeyed commands so cleanly that it created an illusion of mastery long before true understanding had time to form. Early drives felt effortless, almost flattering, as though the car was agreeing with every decision the driver made, no matter how rushed or aggressive. That was the trap, because confidence built too quickly becomes brittle. And this car built confidence faster than experience. Engineers celebrated how intuitive it felt, how little effort it took to drive fast, how naturally drivers pushed harder with each passing mile. But intuition without resistance teaches the wrong lessons, and speed without friction removes the feedback that normally keeps ego in check. Behind the scenes, some testers noticed something unsettling. The car didn't warn drivers when they crossed subtle thresholds. It didn't escalate gradually. It stayed composed until the moment it didn't. Grip vanished suddenly. Balance shifted instantly. Recovery demanded reactions most drivers had never practiced. Yet on the surface, nothing felt dangerous. The car was calm, cooperative, reassuring. It made drivers believe they were better than they actually were. Confidence grew, margins shrank, and the distance between belief and reality narrowed to almost nothing. This wasn't a car that punished recklessness immediately. It waited. It let confidence build unchecked. And by the time drivers realized that confidence had turned into overconfidence, the consequences were already moving faster than thought. Because when a machine rewards belief more than discipline, it doesn't just test skill. It exposes the cost of assuming control without earning it. And that's where the story truly begins. The danger didn't come from obvious brutality, because the car never felt violent in the way people expect danger to feel. And that calmness made it far more deceptive than a machine that scares you immediately. It was smooth, precise, and responsive in a way that made drivers relax their attention, as if the car was quietly promising that nothing bad could happen as long as you stayed confident. From the moment it was released, the reviews sounded almost hypnotic. People called it easy fast. They said it felt like the car could read their thoughts. They praised how quickly it made them comfortable at speeds that should have demanded fear. And that comfort became the first problem, because comfort at high speed is not the same thing as control. And the difference between those two ideas is where this car began rewriting the driver's mind. It didn't teach you patience. It didn't teach you restraint. It taught you that the limit was farther away than it really was. Engineers had built a machine that delivered confidence like a drug. The power came cleanly, without drama, without the warning signs of strain, and the chassis stayed flat and stable in a way that made the driver feel like the laws of physics were negotiable if you were bold enough. Even the braking felt reassuring, strong enough to erase mistakes at first, which meant drivers started making bigger mistakes because they believed the car would always erase them. But the car wasn't erasing mistakes. It was delaying the consequences. Underneath that composed behavior was a balance that demanded respect. Because the moment you pushed past the true limit, the car didn't gradually complain or gently slide like a forgiving teacher. It snapped from stability to chaos in a heartbeat, and that snap arrived so fast that many drivers didn't even understand what they had done wrong until the moment was already gone. That is how confidence became a liability. The car's performance wasn't just high, it was accessible, and accessibility changes behavior. Drivers began pushing harder on public roads, not because they wanted to be reckless, but because the car made recklessness feel like competence. It made acceleration feel clean and safe. It made cornering feel effortless. It made speed feel normal. Then the patterns began appearing. Owners told similar stories in different cities, on different roads, in different weather, as if the car was repeating the same lesson again and again. They would describe a drive that felt perfect, a moment of pure control, and then a sudden loss of grip that felt unfair, as if the car had changed its personality without warning. But the car hadn't changed. The driver had. Confidence had been growing quietly with every mile, and with it came small decisions that seemed harmless on their own. A later braking point, a faster corner entry, a sharper throttle input on exit, a quick correction that felt heroic instead of risky. The car rewarded those choices just long enough to build a habit, and habits, when combined with speed, become destiny. Because the most dangerous machines aren't the ones that feel uncontrollable. The most dangerous machines are the ones that feel controllable until the exact moment they prove you wrong. And once this car proved you wrong, it didn't give you time to apologize. As time passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore, because the same stories kept resurfacing from drivers who had never met, on roads that shared nothing in common, all describing moments where confidence suddenly collapsed into disbelief. Not disbelief at the car's power, but disbelief at how quickly control had evaporated once the invisible boundary was crossed. This was a phase where trust turned into tension. Drivers who once praised the car's friendliness began speaking more carefully, choosing words like sharp, honest, and demanding, as if they were trying to renegotiate the relationship after realizing how unforgiving it could be. They started to admit that the car didn't forgive momentum errors, that it punished abrupt corrections, and that once balance was upset, recovery required reactions far faster than confidence alone could provide. What made this especially dangerous was how late these lessons arrived. Unlike cars that communicate discomfort early, this one stayed composed deep into the danger zone, maintaining grip, stability, and confidence until the driver was fully committed, fully loaded, and fully convinced that everything was under control. Only then did it reveal the truth, when weight transfer, throttle input, and road conditions combined into a situation that demanded skill instead of belief. And belief was no longer enough. On track days, instructors began noticing something unsettling. Drivers who climbed into the car fresh, without prior experience, often overestimated themselves within minutes, pushing harder lap after lap, because the car allowed it, until a single mistake exposed how little margin they actually had. The car wasn't teaching them how to improve. It was skipping steps. That skipping created a dangerous gap between perceived skill and real ability. A gap wide enough to swallow mistakes whole when conditions changed even slightly. Cold tires, uneven pavement, or a fraction too much throttle were all it took to turn confidence into panic, because the car demanded precision that drivers had never been forced to learn. Manufacturers noticed the trend quietly. They saw insurance data shift. They saw incident reports cluster around specific behaviors rather than mechanical failures. They saw that the car wasn't breaking down, but breaking assumptions. Attempts were made to explain it away. Blame shifted to tires, to weather, to driver behavior. But those explanations missed a deeper truth. This car didn't create reckless drivers. It created convinced drivers. It convinced them they were ready before they were. It convinced them that confidence was the same as control. And it convinced them that the car would always catch them, even when physics no longer could. As electronic assistance systems advanced across the industry, this model stood at an uncomfortable crossroads. It was too capable to be gentle and too honest to hide its consequences once the limit was breached. The conflict wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. The car was asking drivers a question they weren't prepared to answer. Were they skilled, or were they simply confident? And for many, the answer arrived only after confidence had already carried them too far. The realization came too late for many drivers, not because they were careless, but because the car had trained them to trust confidence instead of questioning it, rewarding boldness so consistently that doubt slowly disappeared from the driving experience. By the time doubt returned, it arrived as panic, and panic is the least useful emotion at speed. This was the moment when the industry began to look at the car differently. Not as a technical marvel, not as a performance benchmark, but as a psychological experiment that had accidentally escaped into the real world, because the car had proven something deeply uncomfortable. Machines don't just respond to human behavior. They shape it by removing friction, by smoothing reactions, by delivering speed without effort. The car had quietly rewritten how drivers assessed risk, teaching them to associate confidence with safety, even when the two had drifted dangerously far apart. The result wasn't recklessness. It was misplaced certainty. Modern systems would later be designed to interrupt this exact pattern. Stability control that intervenes early. Assistance that communicates limits before they are breached. Warnings that arrive before belief turns into commitment. All of that exists because of lessons learned here. This car became a turning point, a reminder that performance cannot be separated from psychology, and that how a machine feels matters just as much as what it can do. It taught the industry that power delivered too politely becomes persuasive, and persuasion at speed can be fatal when it bypasses learning. Today, cars are faster than ever, but they are also louder in the way they communicate limits, stepping in sooner, correcting more aggressively, and refusing to flatter the driver's ego in the same way. That shift didn't come from fear alone. It came from understanding. Understanding that confidence must be earned repeatedly, not gifted instantly. Understanding that machines should challenge skill, not inflate belief. And understanding that the most dangerous moment is not when control is lost, but when it feels guaranteed. This car didn't fail because it was too fast. It failed because it was too convincing. It showed us that when a machine makes confidence feel effortless, responsibility must work twice as hard to keep up. And that lesson still echoes every time a driver mistakes belief for mastery.